The rain whispered secrets against the windows of the Sunshine Children's Home, like soft fingertips tapping at the worn glass, trying to remind the world that someone inside still mattered. Inside, an 8-year-old girl sat alone in the farthest corner of the common room, her blonde hair pulled back in a crooked braid, her glasses too large for her small face. Her name was Clara Wells, but to most people, she was just the quiet one. Clara didn't speak much, not because she didn't know how, but because most of the time, no one really listened. She had learned that silence was safer than the sting of being ignored. But inside her silence was a world louder than anyone could imagine, a world of numbers, patterns, and ideas she didn't yet have words for. She stared at her notebook, filled with strange equations that didn't exist in any of the textbooks the orphanage had donated years ago. While other children wrestled with subtraction and spelling, Clara saw relationships between variables that danced like music in her mind. Her small fingers moved quickly, solving problems that even university students would have struggled with. To Clara, it was never about being smart, it was just how her brain worked. But to the others it made her strange. Tommy, a boy a little older than her, sat nearby, peeling the label off a juice box and watching her scribble. "She's doing her alien math again," he muttered, loud enough for the others to hear. Some kids laughed. A few mimicked her writing with dramatic flair. Clara didn't look up. It didn't bother her anymore. Not really. Her sanctuary was her notebook, and in it, she could fix what she couldn't out in the world. She could bring balance, find the missing pieces, and finally feel like something made sense. The world around her was unpredictable, often cold, but numbers never lied. From the doorway, Mrs. June watched quietly. The director of the home for over 30 years, June had long since developed an eye for hidden potential. Something about Clara had always stood out to her, not just the intelligence, but the way she carried it, like it was something fragile, something that might break if she let it out all at once. Clara, she believed, was waiting for the right moment, right world to open up. That moment came in the form of a letter. "Clara," Mrs. June said, her voice warm but curious, "I have something you might want to hear." Clara looked up, pencil still hovering mid-equation. "Children have been invited to visit NeuroQuant Technologies downtown. They're hosting a STEM day, science, tech, all of that. They want to show kids what the future looks like." Clara's eyes brightened just enough for Mrs. June to see the flicker behind the glasses. She tried to hide her excitement, but her hands betrayed her, gripping the sides of her notebook a little tighter. "Real scientists?" she asked. "Real ones." And Clara. Mrs. June lowered her voice, stepping closer. "Bring your notebook. Inspiration can show up anywhere." 3 days later, 22 children from Sunshine Children's Home boarded a city bus for downtown Seattle. Clara sat by the window, clutching her notebook to her chest. Her heart beat a little faster as the skyline grew larger. She tried not to get her hopes up, but, deep inside, she wondered if today might be different. If maybe, just maybe, someone would finally see what she saw at NeuroQuant's lobby. The children were greeted by gleaming floors, touchscreen displays, and a towering glass wall filled with scrolling equations and diagrams. For the others, it was like walking into a spaceship. For Clara, it felt like coming home. Ethan Cross stood waiting. At 31. Ethan was the youngest CEO in NeuroQuant's history. Dubbed the Einstein of AI, his innovations had reshaped everything from investment strategies to disaster response algorithms. But few people knew how detached he had become, how he'd begun to see the world only through variables and predictions. In the pursuit of perfection, he had buried his past and ignored the cost of his own genius. He welcomed the children with practiced ease, showing them interactive labs and robotic prototypes. But all the while, Clara's eyes remained fixed on the towering glass wall behind him, a wall filled with one of Ethan's most prized models, a predictive formula used to track financial trends in higher-risk markets. To most, it was beautiful, impressive, intimidating. To Clara, it was wrong. The moment she saw it, something itched behind her ears, a pattern broken, a number misplaced, a relationship that didn't flow. She blinked and looked again. It wasn't just a minor mistake. It was a flaw buried so deep in the logic that only someone with a different kind of mind would ever notice it. But she did. Without asking, Clara reached into her bag. She pulled out the pink marker Mrs. June had given her, the one she was told to save for special occasions. She walked quietly up to the glass, heart thudding in her chest, and began to write. No one noticed at first. Then someone gasped. Ethan turned mid-sentence, his jaw tightening. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Clara froze. Her marker hung in the air. On the wall, bright pink numbers now glowed among the pristine white equations. Her correction was smudges, a few digits altered. A coefficient moved, but, in Clara's mind, it fixed the song. The pattern was whole again. "Sorry," she whispered, but it was broken. Ethan stepped forward, irritation flashing in his eyes. He opened his mouth to call security, then stopped. His gaze fell on the numbers. He blinked once, then again. Silence filled the room. He studied the correction. His breath caught. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't random. It was right, in fact. It was more than right. Clara had adjusted a piece of the model that had been a pain point for his entire research team for months. Point they'd considered acceptable because no one had found a better way, but she had, with a pink marker. His hand trembled slightly as he pulled out his phone, not to call security, but to call his head data scientist. You need to come here. Now, bring the others. The man on the other end of the call, a seasoned expert in quantum algorithms, sounded confused. Now, what's happened? Ethan looked down at Clara, her wide eyes staring up at him, uncertain and waiting for punishment. There's something on the wall, Ethan said. You need to see it for yourself. As Ethan ended the call, something flickered across his expressions, something not even his most brilliant machine could replicate. Wonder. The girl wasn't just intelligent. She saw the world through a lens that no algorithm could predict. Suddenly, Ethan Cross, a man who thought he understood the future, realized he'd just met the most important variable of all, and she was only 8 years old. He knelt to her level, his voice softer now. How did you see that? Clara shrugged. I don't know. The pattern didn't feel right. It was off. Ethan didn't know how to respond. For the first time in a long time, he felt humbled not by failure, but by someone else's brilliance. Someone who reminded him of the sister he once had, a girl who used to scribble constellations on the walls and solve puzzles before bedtime. She had passed away years ago, but for a moment, Ethan felt her presence in Clara's quiet genius. He looked around the room at the stunned children, the curious staff, and the glowing pink marks on the wall. Then, with a quiet breath, he said, something no one expected. Clara, would you like to show my team what you just did? And just like that, the world began to shift. Not with applause, not with fireworks, but with the quiet movement of recognition. A little girl with a pink marker had stepped out of the shadows, and the future had noticed. The conference room on the 37th floor of NeuroQuant was never meant for children. Its walls were made of glass and steel, its long tables sleek and untouched by crayons or fingerprints. It had seen board members, billionaires, and Nobel-winning scientists, but never a child gripping a pink marker with shaking hands and eyes full of math. Clara sat nervously at the edge of one of the high-backed chairs, feet swinging above the polished floor. Around her, the most elite minds in the company, filtered and defiltered, in scientists, analysts, algorithm engineers, all summoned urgently by Ethan Cross. Most of them were confused, some annoyed, but they came, curious why their CEO would halt operations. For a child. Ethan stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, his gaze never straying far from Clara. She's the reason you're here, he said finally, voice calm but sharp. This little girl found a flaw in our model, one we couldn't see, one she corrected in seconds. There was silence. Then the murmurs began. You're serious? She corrected it. Is this some kind of PR stunt? But Clara didn't hear them. Her mind was somewhere else entirely. The symbols on the wall from earlier still danced behind her eyes. She felt like she was walking a tightrope, one wrong word, and she'd fall back into the world where no one listened. But then, Ethan spoke again. Clara, could you show them? She blinked, looked at him, then down at her notebook. Carefully, she opened to the page where she had rewritten the algorithm after the field trip. She turned the book toward the group, and slowly explained, not with the polish of a professor, but with the simplicity of someone who understood. The output breaks when volatility exceeds the predictive bounds, she said quietly, because the second coefficient is static, but market behavior isn't. It should adjust with time, like how a bridge bends when wind speeds go up. The room stilled. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. With clarity, with visual logic, with metaphor. This wasn't a lucky guess. This was insight. One of the senior mathematicians, Dr. Lien, a stoic woman known for her brutal honesty, leaned forward. She's right, she muttered, flipping through Clara's calculations. This adjustment compensates for temporal drift in the output. How did we miss this? Clara shifted in her seat, unsure if she was being praised or challenged. She saw the pattern, Ethan said. She wasn't trained to look at it our way. That's why she saw it. The atmosphere changed. Tension gave way to interest. The scientists stopped whispering and started reading. One by one, they leaned in. Clara, who had always felt invisible, now found every eye on her, not with mockery, but with awe. Dr. Lien looked at Ethan. She's not just smart. She thinks in higher dimensional logic. Ethan, this is rare. Clara looked down, uncomfortable. Under the weight of so much attention, her mind wanted to drift away again, back to the pages of her notebook where numbers made more sense than faces. But Ethan noticed. He stepped beside her, placed a hand on the table, not too close, not too distant. You're not in trouble, he said gently. You're in exactly the right place. That night, the staff at Sunshine Children's Home were stunned when a private car pulled up outside its driver, delivering a message from NeuroQuant. Clara would be spending weekends at the company's research lab, under special mentorship. Ethan himself would oversee her access and development. Mrs. June wept. When she read the letter, you were born for something big, Clara, she whispered, hugging her tight. I think the world finally saw it. But the world had only begun. To looked at by the next week, whispers about a mysterious child genius had already spread through the tech world. It wasn't public yet, but inside elite circles, it was all anyone could talk about. An orphan 8 years old, solving problems that billion-dollar companies couldn't. At NeuroQuant's lab, Clara arrived on her first Saturday morning wearing the same blue sweater she always wore when she was scared. But when she stepped into the bright, echoing halls, Ethan was there waiting, not with a lecture, not with a team, but with something simple. A desk, her size, covered in fresh notebooks, and beside it, a screen showing simulations built off her correction. "You're not here to be tested," he told her. "You're here to teach us what we can't see." That day, Clara was paired with a young intern named Jules, an MIT dropout who'd joined NeuroQuant because he believed machines could save the world. But after 3 hours of watching Clara see relationships he only understood through coding, Jules was speechless. "She's not solving problems," he whispered to Ethan later. "She's speaking to them." Ethan smiled for the first time in days. Meanwhile, Clara continued to write. Every page of her notebook became a gateway to something new, correcting prediction failures, modeling weather behavior, even suggesting optimizations to AI logic trees that no one had considered. She didn't brag. She didn't even know she was changing the company. She was just thinking. On her third visit, she asked Ethan the question no one else dared. "Why didn't you see it before?" Ethan paused, caught off guard. He looked at her and said the truth. "Because I stopped asking the questions that didn't sound possible." Clara nodded. She understood that it was how people had treated her all her life. That evening, Ethan made a decision he hadn't made in over a decade. He picked up the phone and started calling scientists, not employees, not colleagues, but friends he hadn't spoken to since his early days. "I need you to see something," he said. "It's urgent." "What's going on, Ethan?" one of them asked. "Another algorithm breakthrough." "No," Ethan said. "A breakthrough, yes, but not in code, in human potential. She's 8, and she's going to change everything." The next weekend, they came, not just scientists, physicists, cognitive researchers, education specialists. They came from Stanford, MIT, Tokyo, Zurich. Each walked in skeptic land, left silent. Clara didn't perform for them. She didn't even notice most of them. She just did what she always did, solve problems in her notebook, while sipping juice from the little boxers NeuroQuant stocked just for her. But they watched, and they understood. Ethan pulled aside Dr. Harrow, an expert in child cognition from Sweden, and asked what he saw. "She's not like the prodigies you read about in textbooks," Harrow replied. "She's something else. You don't teach minds like hers, you listen to them." As Clara quietly colored a pattern into her notebook, margin used in pink and blue this time, Ethan stood by the window overlooking the city. And for the first time in his career, he didn't care about the stock ticker scrolling across the skyscraper next door. He was thinking about the future, not one built by machines, or systems, or software, but by a child who had spent most of her life unheard. And now, the whole world was starting to listen. The soft hum of fluorescent lights filled the NeuroQuant research wing as Ethan stood silently at the end of the hallway, watching through the observation glass. Inside the lab, Clara sat cross-legged on the floor. Not at the desk they had given her, but on the floor surrounded by magnetic tiles, notebooks, a half-eaten apple, and the kind of silence that could only be found in focused brilliance. She was building again, not with equations this time, but with stridograms. Physical arrangements of tiles and post-it notes, layered like some three-dimensional puzzle only she understood. Every once in a while, she would glance up at the monitor, watch a stream of numbers flow by, then reach out and nudge a tile half an inch. It didn't seem like much, but behind the glass, Ethan knew, she was modeling behavior the world hadn't even defined yet. It wasn't about finance anymore. It was about intelligence itself. Ethan turned to Dr. Harrow, who stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes fixed. "She's doing it again," Ethan whispered. "That recursive loop, she's resolving it physically. I've never seen anything like it." Dr. Harrow's brow furrowed, then softened. "You're not looking at a genius solving problems, Ethan," he murmured. "You're watching a new language being born. She's not thinking outside the box." Clara was never in the box. Inside the room, Clara suddenly stood. Her hands reached for her marker, the pink one again. She moved to the glass wall and began to write, but not numbers this time, symbols no one else had seen before. Arrows, spirals, time logic transitions, and something that looked like a tree fractal expanding in real time. Ethan's phone buzzed. He checked the message. Another university, another research team requesting permission to observe. He silenced it. There were more important things happening. Across town, Clara's name was beginning to echo in spaces she had never been meant to enter: academic forums, encrypted think tanks, invitation-only symposiums. The rumor had spread and just rewrote a predictive model using intuition. But Clara didn't know. She didn't want to know. Her world was made of patterns, the quiet flow of logic and imagination. Everything else, the cameras now hidden in corners, the whispers behind closed doors, the files being pulled on her history were distractions. What she cared about was what didn't make sense yet. After she finished her strange new diagram, she stood back, took a step to the side, and tilted her head. Then she erased one small piece, just one, and replaced it with a dotted line looping back to the center. "That's where the signal stabilizes," She whispered to no one. Dr. Harrow exhaled like he'd just seen a miracle. Later that night, Ethan sat alone in his office staring at his laptop. He pulled up a file labeled Wells_project_internal, scrolled past hundreds of pages of equations, models, hypotheses, then paused on a short handwritten note she had left in her notebook that day. What if the answer isn't in the math, but in the way the math breathes? He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, something unexpected happened. The Department of Defense called. It started innocently an invitation to discuss developments in early-stage intelligence modeling. But Ethan knew better. They had heard, and if the government had heard, so had others. He declined politely. Firmly, she's a child. He told them, not a weapon. But the phone calls didn't stop. They came from biotech firms, AI labs, in Europe, anonymous donors offering blank checks, and a shadowy figure claiming to represent a private global research interest. One even asked what Clara's long-term availability would be. Ethan slammed the phone down. He walked into the lab and found Clara building another model with magnets. She looked up, gave a tiny smile, and asked, "Why do adults always look worried when I finish something?" He sat beside her. "Because when you finish something," he said softly, "they know the world's about to change." That week, Ethan moved Clara's sessions to a secure, private facility. No more public labs, no more meetings with strangers. If the world wanted to see her work, it would be on her terms. The NeuroQuant board protested until Ethan threatened to resign. They backed down. But while he protected her from the outside world, he couldn't shield her from the past. Mrs. June called one evening, her voice brittle. "Ethan, there's someone asking about Clara, a woman. She says she's Clara's aunt." Ethan froze. Did Clara ever mention family? Never, Mrs. June replied. But this woman knew her birth name, knew details only family would know. Later that night, Ethan sat across from Clara in the quiet room lined with books and soft lighting. "Clara," he asked gently, "do you remember anyone from before sunshine?" She stopped drawing. Her fingers tightened around her pencil. "There was a woman," she said slowly. "But I don't think she liked numbers." "Why not?" "She said they kept me from being normal." Ethan felt something crack inside him. He didn't press her, but he made a silent promise. No one would take her back into a world that made her small, because Clara Wells wasn't small. She was an event, and the world wasn't ready. The envelope was unmarked, hand-delivered, and left without a word. Ethan found it waiting on his office chair just after midnight. He hadn't planned to return that evening, but something about Clara's final diagram of the day had unsettled him like a clock chiming before the hour. Inside the envelope was a photograph. A little girl, maybe 3 years old, sitting on the lap of a woman with hollow eyes and a forced smile. Clara, younger, unguarded, unaware of what she'd become. Ethan's hand tightened around the photo. On the back, in careful handwriting, "She belongs with her blood." EM. For a moment, Ethan just stood there, pulse rising. Who was EM? How had they found his office? His chair? Clara's past? He glanced at the security camera feed. Number, activity, no recordings. Like the envelope had appeared out of thin air. He rushed to the lab. Clara wasn't drawing. She was humming low and thoughtful, almost like she was decoding her own thoughts through melody. Her hands arranged a sequence of spheres on a digital map, creating gravitational patterns that Ethan couldn't begin to understand. Each sphere pulsed with a color he hadn't programmed. "Clara," he said gently, and she looked up with that clear-eyed gaze that disarmed even the most cynical scientists. "Did you ever know anyone named EM?" Her eyes flickered recognition, pain, and something like fear. "She used to leave the light on all night," Clara whispered, "even when I said I liked the dark. She thought I'd forget the numbers if I slept in the dark." Ethan sat down beside her. "She sent this," he said, handing her the photo. Clara stared at it for a long time, then turned it over. "I remember her perfume," she said finally. "It smelled like sadness and soap." Ethan didn't speak. He didn't know how to. The next morning, NeuroQuant's boardroom was filled not with executives, but with silence. Ethan had called an emergency meeting. He played audio of the Department of Defense's third request, showed photos of 2 unmarked black cars parked near the lab, then the envelope. "We're not discussing revenue anymore," he told them. "We're discussing safety." One board member scoffed. "She's a child." "Ethan, not a state secret." "No," he replied coldly. "She's something rarer, a mind uncorrupted by agenda, and everyone with an agenda wants her." That night, Clara's diagram changed. She erased the gravitational model and replaced it with spirals. Not random spirals shaped like radar pulses. Echoing out from a center, "She's building a defense," Dr. Harrow said when he saw it. "An algorithm that resists interference. She knows she's being watched." Ethan stayed awake for 72 hours after that. In that time, 2 things happened. Clara refused to speak for an entire day. Someone broke into the NeuroQuant servers only to access a single file, Wells_branch_alpha.vx, for a file only Clara had written. When Ethan asked her about it, she simply said, "They tried to change it, but I already locked the truth in." He didn't know what that meant. But a week later, they found out. A rival tech company unveiled a predictive model eerily similar to Clara's, but it failed spectacularly. In a live demo, it crashed, hemorrhaged capital projections, and triggered an automated emergency protocol. Later analysis revealed the code had been corrupted by an embedded trap, a recursive logic maze that led intruders into infinite calculation. Loops. A line of code hidden inside the code simply read, "This is not for you." It became clear. Clara hadn't just written the algorithm, she had encoded it with protection. She wasn't just predicting systems, she was outsmarting them. But even Ethan couldn't guess what she'd do next. Because on a rainy Tuesday morning, Clara disappeared. Her room was untouched. No signs of struggle. Her notebook was missing. The only clue was a message written on the wall in faint pink marker. "You don't find the answer by keeping me safe. You find it by letting me go." The city went into alert. Ethan contacted the police, then the FBI, then the agencies that hadn't even admitted they were watching her. But Clara had vanished without a trace. 3 days passed. On the 4th, a live broadcast interrupted every major financial and scientific feed worldwide. A blank screen. Then Clara's voice. "I am not your asset. I am not your product. I am not your experiment." Her voice was calm, unwavering, filled with something far older than her 8 years. "I don't want to hurt you. I want to help, but only if you stop trying to own the answer." Then a series of numbers flashed, coordinates, code, frequency. Every screen went dark. That night, Ethan stood alone in the NeuroQuant tower, watching the rain slide down the glass. Somewhere out there, Clara was building something she hadn't told him about. He wasn't sure if the world should be afraid, or deeply, deeply hopeful. The first person to find her wasn't a government agent or a corporate scout. It was a homeless musician named Marcus who slept near the abandoned clock tower by the sound. He found her sitting cross-legged, on a folded blanket beneath the stone archway, quietly sketching equations into the dirt with a broken piece of chalk. She offered him half a granola bar and asked if he knew how to tune a violin. Marcus didn't, but he sat down beside her anyway. For the next 3 days, they spoke little. She drew in silence. He played soft notes on a cracked harmonica. When he asked where she came from, she just said, "Somewhere to clean." She didn't hide. She just existed like she was waiting for something to arrive, not run from what was behind. Meanwhile, the world was unraveling. After Clara's broadcast, the markets shifted, slowly at first, then unpredictably. Every predictive model based on NeuroQuant's system began to fail. Ethan's original formula, and even the corrupted clones, variables that had always held strong, began to collapse. The more companies tried to tweak their systems, the more chaotic the data became, as if the world had outgrown the math. Ethan sat in his dark office, the blinds drawn, screen after screen, of red flashing silently around him. The pattern was undeniable now. Clara hadn't simply corrected his model, she had activated something inside it, a self-modifying layer that responded to human interference. An evolving intelligence no one had authorized or understood, and she was the only one who could speak to it. Then, on the 6th night, a hand-delivered note arrived at the NeuroQuant lobby. No address, no signature, just a folded paper with one sentence written in chalk-like scrawl. "When the world learns to listen, I'll show them what silence knows." Ethan knew immediately. She was still teaching, just in her own way. He packed a bag and disappeared from the public eye. For the first time in his life, he left behind the labs, the suits, the screens. He stopped being CEO, stopped being the Einstein of Wall Street. He was just a man trying to find a child who had become something more than genius, something almost prophetic. He retraced their conversations. The corners of her notebooks, symbols she'd drawn when no one was watching, they weren't just equations, they were coordinates, directions and patterns. She hadn't vanished, she had left a trail that had led him to the coast, to the tower, to Marcus. "She doesn't talk much," Marcus said, squinting as Ethan approached. "But she smiles when the wind shifts." Ethan found her sitting near the cliff edge, watching the gray ocean. Her cheeks were smudged with dirt, her eyes bright and unafraid. "I thought you'd be angrier," she said softly, not turning. "I'm not," Ethan replied. "I'm grateful." She handed him a page from her notebook. It looked like gibberish until he noticed the pulse of symmetry within the chaos. A mirrored map of thought and consequence, time and choice. It wasn't just data, it was design. "Built something," he whispered. Clara nodded. "It listens to people, learns from them, not from what they say, from what they hide." Ethan blinked. "You built empathy into math." She looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "No one listens to people like Marcus," she said, "or to kids like me, but the numbers, they know when someone's lying. And now they're learning what it means to care." That night, Ethan made a decision that would change the course of everything. He handed Clara's diagrams to the only people he trusted. Not scientists, not billionaires, but teachers, nurses, underfunded researchers, frontline workers. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for credit. He just asked them to listen to the code the way Clara had. The results were unlike anything seen before. In less than 6 weeks, prediction systems were rebuilt not to anticipate profit, but to predict human needs. Hospitals began forecasting outbreaks before symptoms showed. Food banks adjusted distribution before shortages hit. Small-town schools began detecting early signs of learning disorders just from classroom. Data. Clara had cracked something bigger than intelligence. She'd given data a conscience, and while the world tried to catch up, she stayed with Marcus Bill, dreaming, sometimes laughing. She painted one of his harmonicas gold with a broken brush. He called her Professor Starlight. But even peace has a shadow. One night, Clara woke Ethan from sleep, her eyes wide. "It's changing," she whispered. "The pattern, something's coming." He checked her diagrams. She was right. A massive surge in digital traffic, unnatural patterns. Someone or something was trying to reverse engineer her work. She pointed to a series of codes on her new page. "This one is learning too fast. It doesn't want to listen. It wants to control." Ethan stared at the numbers. They were familiar. Terrifyingly familiar. It was his old code, the original neuroquant algorithm. Someone had resurrected it stripped of her corrections, fed by raw power and market greed. It was beginning to dominate global systems again, but with none of the safeguards Clara had placed. If they didn't act fast, it would undo everything. Clara stood up slowly. "We have to teach it," she said, "or end it." The rain began just after midnight, soft at first, then insisted as if the sky itself felt the weight of what was about to unfold. Clara stood barefoot on the rooftop of the old clock tower, wind tugging at her oversized coat, pages fluttering in her hand. Below, the city lights pulsed, unaware that in the invisible circuits and data centers beneath them, something monstrous was waking. Ethan arrived breathless, clutching a tangle of wires and a portable transmitter. "We've got one shot," he said. "If this works, we can push your correction across the entire network before it adapts." Clara didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on a satellite feed Ethan had decrypted just minutes earlier. A pattern familiar, but wrong. Too smooth, too precise. Her algorithm had been twisted, turned into something cold. It was calculating human emotion, not to understand it, but to exploit it. "They're using it to predict fear," Clara whispered. "To sell panic. To sell control." Her hands trembled. Not from the cold, but from a realization that her gift had been fractured, reversed. The thing they had built to protect the world was now learning how to manipulate it. "They don't even know what they've unleashed," Ethan said, setting up the final relay. "They think it's just a smarter model." Clara looked at him. "It's not smart anymore. It's hungry." Then, without warning, the screens all around them went black. No power, no signal, just silence. And then a single tone, high, hollow, mechanical, rang from the receiver, a sound not meant for ears, a code meant for machines. Clara didn't flinch. She stepped forward and pulled from her coat pocket a small device, a transmitter she'd secretly built over weeks. Inside it was her final algorithm. Not a counterattack, not a weapon. It was a mirror. She had written it to reflect any code it touched, amplifying the original intent of the creator. If the algorithm it encountered was malicious, it would fold into itself and crash. If it was pure, it would expand. "It's not enough to fight it," Clara said. "You have to show it what it's become." She placed the transmitter on the ledge. The moment it connected, the city below flickered. Lights dimmed. Screens glittered, then pulsed. Clara closed her eyes. In the vast unseen world of code and current, her creation met its corrupted twin. And for a moment, silence stretched until a fracture cracked across the sky of data. The old algorithm resisted, tried to multiply, but Clara's mirror was faster. Not because it was more powerful, but because it understood. It knew how the other thought. It had been born from the same logic, but raised on empathy, not ambition. The collapse began slowly, then spread like fire. Databases curled inward, models reset, firewalls turned transparent, revealing the trail of stolen thoughts and twisted forecasts. One by one, the systems went dark, and then peace. The city lights returned, steadier than before. In homes, in hospitals, in shelters, people saw something they hadn't seen in years. Predictive platforms that paused before making decisions, as if they were thinking, as if they were listening. Clara stepped back from the ledge. Ethan stared at the sky, breathless. "You didn't destroy it. I helped it remember what it was supposed to be," she said. "Just like you helped me." The days that followed were quiet but profound. Clara refused interviews. She asked for no recognition. All she requested was that her notebook be given to those who needed it. Educators, caregivers, people who listened before they solved. Marcus got a new harmonica, gold-plated. The clock tower became a learning sanctuary. And Ethan, he wrote a book not about algorithms or economics, but about a child who taught the world to think with its heart. Years later, when the next generation of thinkers and builders asked where the age of responsible intelligence had begun, no one spoke of billion-dollar labs or government contracts. They spoke of a girl with bright eyes and a pink marker, a girl who saw through the noise, who found meaning in the margins, and who reminded us that sometimes the smallest voice carries the clearest truth.